It's been exactly 10 years since my last lecture here. It was titled Public Text, Stolen Text, and it was on the occasion of the Panza exhibition. For my lecture tonight, I want to briefly consider what makes installations different from other kinds of work. And before I conclude with these comments, I will take you through the images of about 20% of my work of the past 20 years, all in an hour. I will take you through, this is a difficult task, and the selection process borders on the arbitrary, since I don't put it in the work, in the world, unless it is relevant to my practice. However, the ontological moment for art, which every work of art represents, permits these works to serve the argument that I want to propose. This was my project for the Magritte retrospective in 1996 and 97 at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts Canada and the Kunstsammlung Nordheimer Westfalen in Düsseldorf, Germany, curated by Didier Oettinger of the Pompidou Center. I was selected as one of the 6 contemporary artists to be invited to present works within the Magritte exhibition. And for my part of the exhibition, I was given all of the works of Magritte, utilizing words. These works of Magritte were hung on the walls of one large room upon which my installation was installed. The installation was based on a particular work by Magritte, L'Appropriation, from the collection of the Staatsgalerie Stuttgart, Germany, which was also installed in the room. In this installation, the series of elements, the words of Magritte, were replaced by those of Michel Foucault, with key concepts from his book on Magritte, Ceci n'est pas une pipe, from 1973, constructing a parallel work to L'Appropriation, yet one which constituted an overview of Magritte's oeuvre. What the photos don't show was that the light in the room was reduced with the soft floodlights on each of Magritte's work, so that entering the room, one only saw the works of Magritte. My wall installation was only visible after the eye adjusted to the overall light. For the photo, of course, I had that brighter lights. At the Palazzo Cornelius Stampaglia, 1997 in Venice, I did the material of Ornament, which was part of the Sarajevo 2000 exhibition of the Venice Biennale. The source for this work was a text by John Ruskin, dated from the middle of the 19th century. Ruskin's goal was to list the elements that constituted architectural ornamentation. In my work, I was also curious to see if I could stand some of my own presumptions on their head and do a work about decoration and ornamentation, fairly taboo, which nonetheless, at the same time, was a reflexive state of its own decorative role, even if in contradiction. I was interested in the idea of taking a theoretical model of ornamentation and using that as ornamentation. Twice defined, 1997. Miyake Prefecture Library, Yokohama, Japan. The architect is Hara. The Miyake is where the first Japanese dictionary was written. It is on deposit in this library. It was based on Webster's, the first American dictionary. My work employed texts from both of the first dictionaries. The Boundaries of the Limitless, 1997, Queen Square, Yokohama, Japan. This is the atrium of the largest building in Japan. Approximately 500,000 people a day see my work because the Yokohama train station is at the bottom of it. Leipzig, Laocoon, Leipzig, 1997, on the floor of the Bundesbank. I can't talk about everyone, sorry, but time doesn't permit. Freedom and Belief, their own affair, 1998. Parliament Square, Stockholm, Sweden. This work, which was located in the center square of the Swedish Parliament building, is also at the point where the main street in Stockholm joins the Old Town and the New Town. The work consisting of texts by August Strindberg and Selma Lagerhof. It is Its permanent home divides the work between the facade of the Moderne Musik facade, where it is now installed, and the interior main hall of the permanent collection at the Moderne Musik. Conditions of absence, the name and its bearer for G. 1999, Villa Medici, the French Academy in Rome. This is an installation about absence. I utilized the titles of the works which were removed from these niches when the Medici family returned to Florence. The work was a response to the recent death of a close friend in Rome, Gino de' Medici. A map for a silence library, 1999. The Kunstmuseum of the Canton Thurgau, Kartus, Ettingen, Switzerland. Initially, a 3-year installation of a work based on a library which no longer exists there. These are just teasers. Understand? The Chair in Front of the Door, 1999. Gimignano, Italy. A text of Walter Benjamin's written by him while visiting the town. The wall is in front of a geriatric hospital in San Gimignano. Percola and Comata, 2000. Kunsthalle Basel, Switzerland. The program of the Kunsthalle Basel is to present the works of younger, emerging artists. However, the director, Peter Pakish, decided that it would be interesting to present the work of the 4, he felt, most influential artists working at that time for this generation. The 4 artists chosen were Michelangelo Pistoletto, John Baldessari, Ilya Kabakov, and myself. The proposal initiated by Peter Pakish was that we should collaborate together on an exhibition. We had several meetings together, should have been filmed, but they weren't, and decided that the date of 1968 would constitute a kind of causal nexus, linking the 4 of us. The idea was that Pistoletto would be anchored to Torino, 1968, Baldessari to Los Angeles, 1968, Kabakov to Moscow, 1968, and I would have New York, 1968. So for this project, I decided to take the names of 10 people from the New York area that were born in 1968, and also of 10 people from the New York area that died in 1968. In this way, the work covers a period of around 100 years, which actually constitutes the 20th century. A link exists between the 2 lists, which is Robert Kennedy and his daughter, Rory Kennedy. When Robert Kennedy was assassinated in 1968, his wife was pregnant with Rory. They never met. The names on both lists are representative of a social and cultural life, with each name constituting a context of human presence and representing, in each case, a context which is rich with implication. It is a work about life and death, a record of implied potential and known accomplishment, about arrival and departure. We can think of individuals and sense how each person is, in fact, a world in themselves. We can also think about the links between the people, which we call culture, a link which forms the fabric of a social whole and forms a community and a civilization. It is also a comment on what we have to teach and what we have to learn. Ripensare il Vero, 2001, Piazza del Plebiscito, Naples. The result of an annual invitation to an artist to do a temporary work over Christmas and New Year in the main square in Naples. I presented an obscure text by Benedetto Croce from Naples, pertaining to the concept of truth. The work was a scandal, with articles in the local press nearly daily for and against the work. Eventually, a cultural politician was asked on Italian TV what he thought of the work. And he said, well, I was discussing it with Pope Paul II the other day, and I asked him what his opinion was. And he said, I almost hear the words, I do not support the work of Kosuth because it relativizes truth. I cannot support this. The upside of the whole thing was a letter, and I said to myself, when was the last time I was going to get a chance to piss off a pope? That's truthful. Okay. The upside of the whole thing was a letter from one of the still living granddaughters of Croce, who wrote me with thanks for initiating a new discussion about their grandfather. Was war also das Leben, 2000. My project for the German Parliament in Berlin, for the project at the Bundestag, there are, I don't know, this is garbled, sorry. There are even another special considerations which can potentially enrich the work as an interface of political meanings uplifted to a level of cultural symbolism. I've chosen for this work texts by two authors, Ricarda Hoch and Thomas Mann. From Magic Mountain, where Mann talks about the origin of life, for those of you familiar with that book. But these two individuals have made an important contribution to German literature and the writing of history. Hoch, who spent an important part of her professional life in the east of Germany, and is also a woman, seemed a good balance to Mann, who considered Hoch the greatest woman of his time. Ricarda Hoch lived many years in East Germany and was an early proponent of feminism, and was the first professor to speak out against the firing of her Jewish colleagues who were being removed from the German universities in the 1930s. Frammenti da Vitruvio, 2001, Foro Triano, Rome. Too fast? A 30,000-meter work located through the Foro, visible by night. A paragraph on the nature of architecture by the most important architectural theoretician of ancient times. In fact, the Foro was based on his theories. Was cut into fragments and located on the architectural fragments of the Foro. Contemplation, 2002. I conceived this work for the Museum of Typewriters in Parsene's Bolzano, and it was placed in the public space adjacent to the museum through the period of the exhibition. In this work, I juxtaposed a text by Nietzsche with a photograph of Nietzsche's own typewriter. Nietzsche was the first philosopher to use a typewriter, an event which Friedrich Hitler calls a turning point in the organization of discourse. A View to Memory, Vienna, Austria, 2002. In 2001, the Sigmund Freud Museum in Vienna acquired the building storefront, which once housed Sigmund Kornmeier's kosher butcher shop. This space was converted to present site-specific works by contemporary artists, as well as a showcase some of the Freud Museum's contemporary art collection, which I co-founded with the curator Peter Pakish and then Sigmund Freud Museum director Inge Schultz-Strasser. I inaugurated the opening of the storefront, which was then used for this series hereafter, the series of installations for contemporary site-specific works. My installation for this space was titled A View to Memory, and as a work that utilizes public space by appropriating historical photographic documentation of the original facade of what was once Freud's home on Berggasse 19. The appropriated image shows the storefront and the Nazi bunting over the entrance to Berggasse 19. I included a copy of the original photograph, positioned it near the window front, and enlarged part of the document so as to literally recreate the entire entrance to Kornmeier's kosher butcher shop exactly in its original location, juxtaposing a quote by Sigmund Freud as a banner on the top of the appropriated image. This work is a reflection on public memory and shows how the photograph constitutes two sides of the subject, its maker and its delayed viewer, as it attempts to reveal the represented world and its subject within, and how these two elements mirror each other and thereby reflect the world. An old photograph locates the past as it problematizes the present. Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, Boston, 2003. I was chosen to be the centennial artists of the museum. This exhibition was comprised of 3 parts, each an autonomous work that functions both independently as well as being 3 elements of a whole. The exhibition rests on 3 individuals who had 3 separate roles within the production of cultural meaning of their time: James Whistler, Bernard Berenson, and Isabella Stewart Gardner. For those of you who don't know, Bernard Berenson traveled across Europe and would take photographs of works he would propose to Isabella Stewart Gardner. This was the first collection that was put together based on photographs primarily. This is an installation from the Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Moderna, Rome, Italy. The context of art, how it both produces meaning and is itself affected by the world, as it affects the world, is reflected in this work of 2005, a permanent installation on the floor of the courtyard at the Galleria Nazionale in Rome, which employs mosaics produced based on computer drawings to construct a work rooted in the writing of Giordano Bruno in the museum courtyard. Recognizable differences, and Andersen, self-described, 2009. Recognizable differences literally presents an opportunity to wander about in Andersen's intellectual universe. Recognizable differences form of presentation is a giant carpet covering all of the Nicolai Museum in Copenhagen's upper gallery. On the lower gallery was an installation by Ilya Kabakov. We were both invited together. Andersen's fairy tale, The Emperor's New Clothes, has been woven into the carpet, as has a selection of quotes by Soren Kierkegaard, which are presented as a subtext to the fairy tale. Andersen was quite obsessed with being taken seriously as a writer, a difficulty given that he wrote for children. Eventually, he heard that a contemporary, Soren Kierkegaard, planned on writing about him in a forthcoming book. However, when the book came out, he was crushed to find there was a damning criticism of his writing. This was a cause of depression for him throughout the rest of his life. What I did for Andersen on his 100th birthday was to research through the writing of Kierkegaard and find quotes that could be seen as support for his writing, using Kierkegaard's own words and thus providing a fine present to him on his birthday. My second work is a neon work consisting of 2 parts, inside and outside the tower, respectively. This work relates to Hans Christian Andersen's replies to the many questions in a visitor's book concerning his preferences within all aspects of his life, and it thus serves as a kind of self-portrait. The questions can be found inside the tower, and Andersen's replies will shine over the city from the outside of Nicolai's distinctive tower. Seeing and knowing. This double billboard work was commissioned for the Castello Rivoli Museum of Contemporary Art in Turin in 2004 as a site-specific work and produced in conjunction with a series of exhibitions called Concept, Body, and Dream in 2006. The installation work is a double illuminated panel, one part installed on the top of the roof of the museum, while the other is installed in the interior under the roof on the 3rd floor. The work quotes Giovanni Battista Vico in both Italian and English, and manifests how knowledge itself is constituted in the knower. Seeing knowing is part of the permanent collection of the Castello Rivoli. The Language of Equilibrium, 2007. This project in Yellow Neon has as its basis language itself. It is a work which is both a reflection on its own construction as well as on the history and culture of the location. This work is comprised of words from the Armenian, Italian, and English languages. Language here is used as a signifier of the history of the project of the Nectarian order, which is the religious order that has the buildings on the island. They have control of the whole island. Yellow neon is chosen for this work because the symbolic understanding of yellow at the time of the founding of the monastery as meaning virtue, intellect, esteem, and majesty. Bockler, 1688. The two supportive components of the work, based on the word water, are comprised of words arrived at through a view of their history and use. One aspect of this installation shows this relationship. The other part reflects the role of these words in the Hezesian Pararan, or the Armenian dictionary, 1749, written by Abbot Mechtar, founder of the order. Structure of this installation has two elements, which are integrated on four diverse architectural locations: the bell tower, the northwest wall, the promontory, and the observatory. These four locations reflect both the diversity of the island's architecture as well as articulate the history and culture of the island. The work reflects the cultural and social history of the evolution of language itself, how the history of a word shows its ties to culture and social realities quite distinct and disconnected. It is only in the present when a word is used, as it is with a work of art being experienced, that all that which compromises the present finds its location in the process of making meaning. Here, in this work, language becomes both an allegory and an actual result of all which it would want to speak. Not appearance, not illusion. At the Musée du Louvre, 2009, Paris, France. This originally began as a show for 9 months, and then it was made permanent. The first question Giacinto Lagura asked me in our interview in the catalog to the show, which I think is a useful beginning here: how and why have you chosen this very special place in the Louvre? And this was my response. There were several reasons. First, I wanted a place which was, in a sense, generic Louvre. I wanted the sense of history of the place of art, suggested by the totality of the Louvre, with that providing a kind of tabula rasa upon which I could write. It is the cellar, the underground, and the weight of all that history is pressing down on it. Yet it is an empty space, one which is passed through on the way upstairs to see other concrete and specific fragments of our cultural history. When you are in the passage of the medieval walls, you sense the weight of history, almost as history itself. But it's not a specific history as the defined and articulated areas with its objects are upstairs. It also seemed appropriate that my work was one with the architecture itself, without the surplus meaning which the art and artifacts alone above would provide. The foundation walls, by the way, this was the original 12th century walls of the Louvre Palace. It was discovered when they built the pyramid. The foundation walls of the original Louvre Palace seemed, well, to be foundational, as a place for me to produce the meaning which I wanted. I also liked that the space is a passage. It's discursive, a location where one walks and talks on your way somewhere else. The box-like arrival location of rooms are often experienced as a series of endgames where you stop, and there the work plays its role as objects of contemplation and thus seem final and totalizing. I chose a similar kind of space, a passage for my show at the Hirshhorn some years before. There is a particular quality to the outside spaces in museum interiors, edging work seen there as the graffiti in relation to the more formal and institutionalized stasis of the works in the room. Architecture is the most psychological of the arts. It defines the approach to work and frames your response to the kinds of meanings you find in it. These spaces are freer, more open, obviously, and it permits a somewhat different kind of relationship with the work seen there. The area I chose of the Louvre is the psychological interior streets of the city of the Louvre. You're not in the house yet, where the work's accumulated history of its culture resides. At this point, you can only anticipate that history. The doghouse. This was a private commission done for someone named Johnny Walker. If you know him, he's quite famous in Tokyo. 2011. Nothing to say. These are all quotes about dogs. Kosuth Light, if you don't mind. This was a commission, next, a commission for a work on the facade of the Dutch equivalent of the Office of the State Department of Holland. My choice was to use quotes from Spinoza. Camus Illuminated, Paris, 2013. An installation of works based on the writing of Albert Camus in French, Arabic, and English. Sigmund Freud and the play On the Burden of Representation, 2014, 21st House. It was part of the Belvedere. This was my foundation there. That's part of the Sigmund Freud Gesellschaft. And I put together a collection over the years by asking artists, friends, to donate works to the Freud Museum. And so it was showing that collection. And there was a room of just my works of the 80s in which they were all based on Freud. I did it when it's the 50th anniversary, and this is the second, and that was in the Sigmund Freud Museum, actually the department, which they finally acquired. And this was the 75th anniversary of the death of Freud, was the occasion. This is the Kunstmuseum Thurgau, where you earlier saw the work on the floor. This is a permanent work on the outside of the museum. All right, this is Havana. This was part of it was part of the Biennale of Havana. I was given an honoris causa doctorate while I was there. So for 300 years, in this area, there were silver mines. And the silver mines slowly died. They ran out of silver. Mostly the money from the silver mines were given to the King of Denmark to wage war on Europe. Anyway, this is a new building. I was given a commission to do a work. Keep going. You see, stop there. These are the names of the silver mines and when they died, essentially. This is a big project, I think about 185 meters long. At the main train station in Taipei, Taiwan, and this was 3 years ago now, yeah. It's a novel by a local writer about travel. To keep it simple, I'll say that. So this is, I did a work at the Cornier Stampada, which has a famous Scarpa garden. And I did the work on the facade, as you saw. Well, now this is a room that Scarpa did at the university, and it's on the Grand Canal. And that was up for the Architecture Biennale, and then it was kept up for the Art Biennale. I was doing 2 biennales at one time. This was a great invitation I got from the museum in Philadelphia, right next to the big Duchamp installation, where it was a kind of, I went many times in my life to see. And it was a work that I did in honor of Nude Descending a Staircase for a show with Francis Naumann. So there's a famous 18th century staircase in the Somerset House, and it was a big exhibition organized in honor of Stanley Kubrick. And it was great because I got to go to the storage of all the props from all of his films as one of the artists in the show, in case we needed to get any ideas. But I brought my ideas with me. But nonetheless, this is the staircase, quite quite a beautiful one. But it was a temporary show. So this is a work I did. I was the only living artist in the show. It was a marvelous show about essentially Magritte in philosophy at Centre Pompidou. This work, next year, I will be installing it in the Magritte Museum in Brussels in a permanent way. So this is recent work, last year. It was an exhibition in Kaohsiung, which is at the very bottom of Taiwan. And it was a group show based on the river that goes through that town, which is the second largest town, called Love River. And it was taken from, anyway, it interrogates the objects produced by cartographers and explores the language inherent in map making. The artist questions the very, meaning myself, semantics of localization and how this linguistic need stems not so much from an inquiry into representation, but from a process of production and ultimately the shaping of meaning itself. The work entitled Mappa Mundi, Taiwan, 2017, is comprised of a large site-specific neon installation accompanied by a series of silkscreen panels containing a selection of quotes by various writers, each text referring to the ontology of cartography and mapping. The neon work is a line drawing, a reproduction of an existing Dutch map dated circa 1638. I composed an illuminated trace of the perimeter of an old cartography of the south end of the island of Taiwan. While I have often referred both directly and indirectly to maps and the process of mapping in previous works, the current work represents my first geological neon map. I have said the use of old maps is a useful device. Unlike the maps we have naturalized as part of our contemporary national identity, on the one hand, and our practical use of them on the other, an old map bears the device of its own vision of the world through the picture of it that worldview constructs. It's one we experience as a difference from our present concept of the world, obviously, and thus it becomes something visible. There's a kind of linguistic component to maps. Language loses its transparency in an interesting way in an old map. Intellect to opinion. I just came from LA, I was there last week. There's a show called Plato in LA at the Getty Villa. And this was the work I did for that show. Apropos, Reflecteur, 2004, from my exhibition at Sean Kelly. It was constructed as a kind of intellectual map of French philosophy. It's, for me, a very, very important installation, so I show it here, a little bit out of order in terms of the chronology, but it doesn't matter. So, Nietzsche, Darwin, and the Paradox of Content was at the Talbot Rice Gallery, Scotland. The work you see on the screen was originally conceived in occasion of the Edinburgh Festival. They do usually one big art exhibition at least, in the University of Edinburgh's Talbot Rice Gallery, 2009. This is where the young Charles Darwin studied the stuffed birds that filled the vitrines at that time. In reference to this installation project, it was titled, an interpretation of this title. Well, we already said that, didn't we? So never mind. Oh, it went to Sydney after. Okay. The drawings by Charles Darwin, as depictions of a scientific order being posited, are maps of relations as much as representations of the face of science as a belief in its making. They constitute both creativity and a truth to be. We have a historical view of the formation of our beliefs and their exegesis from the hand of a man. These are on deposit at Cambridge University. And I found all these drawings by Darwin, and none of the Darwin experts know what any of them mean, which is fantastic. Then I could step in. We have in the same space a horizon line of two texts by Nietzsche, which sets the perspective of the total installation, a comment on the play of its parts. This provides both a self-reflection as well as a deeper edification of the work's combined elements to be understood and experienced as a whole, as they simultaneously provide a warning and a critique of the work's presumptions. Above, on the mezzanine level, is another kind of map of relations which shadow and illuminate science as constituted by the drawings of Darwin below. The web of connections. Between these quotes of Nietzsche follow interior arguments concerning art and nature, to art and science, to art and philosophy. This tree of relations elliptically self-reflects on Nietzsche's view of how art, as a construction, serves the self and asserts the self-made. In this view, the truth claims of science are put in suspension, that's good, Freudian slip, suspension, in order to propose an aesthetic project that, while being located externally, posits an understanding manifested by being asserted indirectly, and yet no less as an epistemic restraint, and thus honestly. As Nietzsche stated, quote, "Our ultimate gratitude is to art. If we had not welcomed the arts and invented this kind of cult of the untrue, then the realization of general untruth and mendaciousness that now comes to us through science, the realization that delusion and error are conditions of human knowledge and sensation, would be utterly unbearable. His honesty would lead to nausea and suicide. But now there is a counterforce against our honesty that helps us to avoid such consequences, art as the goodwill to appearance." You can always count on Nietzsche. Text for Nothing, 2010. The installation work you currently see on the screen was developed for the architecture of the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, ACA, in Melbourne. The text, written in warm white neon and partially blackened out on the front surface, are comprised of passages from the dialogue of Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, put in play in relation to his lesser-known writing, Text for Nothing. The illuminated image is that of Caspar David Friedrich's painting, Two Men Looking at the Moon, 1819, which is considered to be the painting that inspired Beckett to write Waiting for Godot. Abandoned for years by the major critics of Beckett's work and rarely included in anthologies of his writing, Text for Nothing was seen as outside of the mainstream of Beckett's writing. Previously viewed as somewhat of a pause in the aura of Beckett, for me as an artist approaching his work, this writing, for my purpose, is quintessential Beckett, the perfect example of his particular artistic integrity. Beckett's project as an artist has been instructive to me and touches on questions which occupy my own work. That is, a concern with meaning. One of many differences, of course, is that Beckett approaches the question of meaning from its absence. In my work, I have been concerned with how meaning is made. But that said, the approach can neither be obvious nor singular. Text for Nothing is the least narrative of all of Beckett's writing and has been the most useful to me. To manifest descriptions of the parts unsaid and only to be seen in Beckett is to underscore that this work, and that is also my work, awaits for the viewer-reader. That is, it is a process, and it is incomplete. It is work that only begins, it does not end. My work is made possible by what is shared in both works. This work, in both senses, constitutes language itself. It is self-described, and as an object, it is one constructed as an absence from which our questions about meaning can flow, even if only through a lack which manifests itself as a form of desire. With Beckett, we have language, self-erasing as it arrives, seeing itself reflected in the collapse of its own significance, and meaning being manifested through confrontation with its own nothingness. Meaning here is what is left behind as a kind of residue of the world's effect. In the case of Waiting for Godot, it has been described as a drama concerned with the collapse of language itself. Collapse of language, belief, and ultimately meaning itself. By doing so, Beckett bears the device of all other theatrical projects, before and after. The how of traditional, even modern theater pales, even becomes meaningless in the face of why that is revealed as quite possibly unsupportable. Not unlike the philosophical project of Ludwig Wittgenstein or the artistic project of Ad Reinhardt, saying what's not possible may be the only approach to showing what is. The project is to glimpse in passing what it would be like to believe and where meaning might be found. This is the painting by David Kessler Friedrich. This postmodern project, however, out of the process of an etymological-like formative historical path of growth within culture, has internalized a carried-over feature of modernism. This can be seen as that art requires a self-definition, even if a continually transformatory one, to be put in play in the service of maintaining the recognition of itself, that of having a quality of transitory autonomy. This feature is a necessary one for art to be readable and meaningful in a given cultural and historical moment. This is the operative play of art, and is part of the nature of the dynamic of its own inherent cultural force to self-describe itself in relation to the world in which it finds itself, even if always in a way which is subject to revision by the practitioners of culture themselves, who must embrace it. It is the internal drive of art toward implicit autonomy that provides its traction with the world. Art's ultimate refusal to participate with the world as a knowing partner within a context of other meanings, corporate, religious, entertainment, et al., is how it preserves and maintains its own particular, even if non-prescriptive, character. Viral life, as Felix Gonzalez Torres put it so eloquently, art's paradoxical dialectic requires that it must take on the forms and meanings of the world of the living, and borrowing freely, as part of a dynamic of an interior order which protects its identity as something other than the world in order to make meaning for the living in the world. That which distinguishes the actual production of art from that of paintings by monkeys or the drawings of children is that intentional act manifesting a specific kind of meaning, art, within human cultural and social meaning, one which necessitates an individual's intention to take subjective responsibility for that act, and without which such an activity can have no political life. Without such a profile of autonomy, art could never see itself. That is, it would lose its self-reflexivity and thus its capacity as a critical and political force within culture. Or as Gaston Bachelard put it, as soon as art becomes autonomous, it makes a fresh start. In this way, art manifests itself as a continual and dialectical new beginning. As part of its own autonomous spiral, it must be able to see itself, which also means to see the world in itself as it proceeds. This self-reflexive moment constitutes in culture the basis for its political life, as a critical space and as a transformatory one, as a moment within its role as part of the production of consciousness itself. And as it does so, human intention takes on its role as a producer of meaning, along with the subjective responsibility for having done so, and thereby anchors the cultural discourse of which it is a part to the historical moment in which it happens. It is this which gives art its authenticity, both in the present and for future generations. Installations as a structural or constructive element can be often be conceived by the artist as a kind of stage set, an autonomous one, built to generate the play which follows from it. The play, itself a connecting and disrupted narrative of discourse, of historical and cultural references, makes formal associations with both art and non-art sources, and contains both social and political meaning within a cultural view, along with the psychological and other associative responses to an architectural setting, already internalized as part of the installation. The play arrives with the viewer, and it consists of the approach itself toward what the viewer finds there. The dialogue, as initiated, is provided by this discourse, and it begins as an interior one. The theater of which I speak is one anchored in the world, and as installation has been a liberating platform for practicing artists who establish it as their own postmodern zone of play. The actors in this play are without a script, and the viewing audience and actors are, in fact, one and the same. Neither the fictive nor the properly theatrical are to be found in the program of this artistic enterprise. There's no need for absorption nor a passage to transcendence. There's only a construction within a cultural discourse at a moment of its own history, one having a language that needs to be seen as the interface where meaning in this world is in the process of construction. It is the meaning which shows, constructed in a way which is specific to art, and its assertions are no less significant, philosophically or culturally, for being manifested and implicit. Installations arrived as a result of the need of artists to produce works which were in the world, whether employing objects or not, but which were not framed by the limits imposed by the fictive space requirement of modernist sculpture and painting. Thus, in important ways, installations were also free of the ideological baggage of modernism, particularly given the consequences of the hijacking of late modernism by Greenberg, Fried, and their followers. That their contribution was seen at the time as more than just an intellectual event in academia, where it has since been consigned, remains a curiosity from my generation. One can now see that the contributions then was primarily negative, because there emerged no art of any significance which was generated by or had the support and positive influence of this theory. Its role was primarily one of a negative framing and misreading of work, such as pop art or minimalism, which in fact has since proved to be both significant and consequential. If by reactionary one means a response intended to maintain the status quo, this certainly defines the efforts of Greenberg, Fried et al. It was the theoretical shoring up of a form of art, which was modernism itself, that was already beginning to lose its relevance. That was certainly obvious to many of us even then, and it is simply a fact now, some 40-some years later. The lesson here is about the power of art to define its own self-conception within the practice itself, as it participates in shaping the culture of its time. What it reveals is the limited value and effect of any theory without the anchor of an actual artistic practice supporting it. The system of beliefs which accompanies and shapes the view of an object intended as art, as being not simply an object, but as a construction, was for me exactly where the rupture needed to take place. And it was the location where a practice concerned with why found itself with a mission that felt at the time like historical necessity. And it should be said that even if still modernist in many ways at the time, minimalism nonetheless was important for making a break, which showed the way out of that swamp of meaning. Hard to use the word swamp now, isn't it? Which modernist art practice in the form of sculpture and painting increasingly represented. This was long before the market turned minimal art back into sculpture for its own purposes. The view from the balcony now is a view which includes both modernism and postmodernism. And the terrain we see is one built over the past 30 or 40 years and resulting in another culture with other expectations and a different mission. If John showed us how a canvas wasn't a window into another space, installations constitute a leap and a break. They are already in the world we inhabit, and the effect they have is meant to happen there. The questions our work became free to ask are a result of us as artists finding ourselves there. The work, which has thus, what this has initiated in the past decades, has shown that playing field to be a fertile one, and as has the theory also initiated by institutional critique, which in its various forms has benefited most significantly. It is actual works upon which art theory must be anchored. And without the discourse begun by conceptual arts works, the conversation we call institutional critique couldn't be taking place. The material of an installation is first a psychological and social experience provided by the room's architecture. The result from the meaning of the social and cultural history of its use, along with the combined experience of the psychology of that particular architectural context added to our prior architectural experience. We know and experience that while we also know that, while we are standing in the world. We also know that in a museum or a gallery, that, like anything else, its being there could be of limited duration, but we suspend our understanding. That world, as that location, that institution or place of cultural activity, will change and continue in another way. This location and time provides contemporary installations that texture of history, which is part of one's more immediate experience of them. The point is that an installation work, even a temporary one, insofar as the experience of the work goes, is attached to a location. It's fixed as part of the architecture and seals its fate along with the history and culture of that one location in the world. The implication being quite unlike the free-floating object that transcends any particular place, finding its aura in the market on the way to its final resting place of the Heavenly Museum. It is the loss of the sense of self with absorption which removes the viewer from the here and now and makes the experience of a fictive space even possible. Why installations are so intrinsically linked with this understanding of postmodernism is that their commitment to a location links them to the here and now, and yet discursively part of what makes them art, and as such, as art, they can do so while they remain in the world. Thank you.